Ducat relaxed back in his chair and enjoyed the flickering circus of light surrounding the warship with a sense of utter victory. The Empire would name this wormhole after him, would find a way to suitably reward him. The light cleared and gave way to stars. Gul Dukat, we have reached the Gamma Quadrant. Very good. Come about and prepare to re-enter the wormhole. He watched the stars shift slowly as the great vessel turned 180 degrees to face the wormhole once again, its entrance still illumined with soft, flickering rainbow light. Then before him, the wormhole shattered into 1,000,000 points of light and was gone. Aboard the runabout, O'Brien's voice filtered through the comm panel. Are you sure it collapsed? It could have withdrawn deeper into subspace. Dax clearly heard the desperation all of them felt. She worked swiftly to take sensor readings of the area. We haven't found any indication of that, but we're still checking. Should I turn the station around and go back? Major Kira leaned forward over the control panel, her short dark hair falling forward against her cheek, her eyes burning with intensity. She was struggling to suppress the feelings of despair over the loss of Benjamin, and more. The wormhole meant the economic salvation of her people. What's your position? I'll be at your coordinates in less than 3 hours. Uncertainty flickered in Kira's dark eyes for a millisecond, then was replaced by utter determination. Maintain your course. We'll rendezvous here. By then, our scan should be complete. None of them wanted to yield to hopelessness, to give up on Benjamin, on the wormhole, this soon. O'Brien's voice revealed his relief. Aye, sir. By the way, we've been getting queries from the Cardassians since their ship disappeared from the sensor field. Odo spoke, his tone colorless, humorless. They'll see Gul Dukat in about 60 or 70 years if he starts back right away. Sisko lingered in the void. Despite the horror of returning to the scene of dying Saratoga, Sisko felt a deep sense of loneliness at the alien's disappearance. Talk to me. Are you still there? Jennifer appeared, clad again in bathing suit and sunglasses. She approached solemnly. More if you're kind. He struggled to understand. Another ship? In the wormhole? She tipped the sunglasses down with a finger and stared over the rim. Wormhole? What is this? It is how we describe the kind of passage that brought me here. Jennifer vanished. Sisko stood once again in the Enterprise observation lounge, arms clasped behind his back. Captain Picard turned from the window, his expression tight and disapproving. It has been terminated. Sisko shuddered with a sudden chill. Terminated? The scene shifted to the bridge of the Saratoga. Locutus was on the main view screen. Our existence is disrupted whenever one of you enters the passage. Ensign Tamamota turned from her console and faced Sisko. Your linear nature is inherently destructive. You have no regard for the consequences of your acts. Sisko raised his voice in protest. That's not true. We're aware that every choice we make has a consequence. Suddenly, the fishing pond, the trees, the shade, Jake dangling his legs in the water. The boy was frowning. Then how can you take responsibility for your actions? Sisko was weary of explaining, but unwilling to surrender. We use past experience to guide us. For Jennifer and me, all the experiences in our lives prepared us for the day we met on the beach and helped us recognize that we had a future together. When we married, we accepted all the consequences of that act, whatever they might be, including the consequence of you. The boy drew back, puzzled. Me? My son, Jake. In sickbay, newborn Jake, swaddled in a blanket, nestled in his father's arms. Sisko grinned from ear to ear. He turned and looked over to see Jennifer, flushed and exhausted. She whispered, "The child with Jennifer. Linear procreation?" Sisko nodded with excitement. She was beginning to understand. Yes, Jake is a continuation of our family. Sisko was now on the pitcher's mound. He snapped his arm gracefully and hurled a perfect fastball at the batter, who swung at the air. The ball smacked into the catcher's, Jake's, glove. It's a game that Jake and I play on the holodeck. It's called baseball. Jake rose out of his crouch behind home plate, took off the catcher's mask and stared at it curiously. He tossed the ball to his father. Baseball? What is this? Sisko caught the ball in his glove. I was afraid you'd ask that. Well, here goes. I throw the ball to you, and this other player stands between us with a stick, a bat, and he tries to hit the ball in between these two white lines. The batter might swing and miss. He might hit it. You never know. You try to anticipate, set a strategy for all the possibilities as best you can, but in the end, it all comes down to throwing one pitch after another and seeing what happens. With each new consequence, the game begins to take shape. In fact, the game wouldn't be worth playing if we knew what was going to happen. Jake squinted in disbelief. You value your ignorance of what is to come? Sisko nodded, driving home his point. That may be the most important thing to understand about humans. It is the unknown that defines our existence. We explore our lives day by day, and we explore the galaxy. That is why I'm here. Not to conquer you, but to coexist and learn. Jake ran the back of his hand across his forehead, wiping away perspiration. Sisko waited, hopeful for a response, and glanced back down at the baseball in his grasp. The ball had disappeared. Sisko gasped and recoiled from the sight of his hands scorched and bloody. He was in his quarters aboard Saratoga, Rannoch beside him, the deck ripped asunder, flames shooting up from below. Jake, unconscious, and peeking out from the edge of the scorched bulkhead, Jennifer's lifeless hand. He heard Rannoch's voice over the crackling of the flames. If all you say is true, why do you exist here? Sisko stared at him wildly, beyond understanding. Minutes after the space station had arrived at the wormhole site, Major Kira stood in ops, watching 3 Cardassian warships approach on the view screen. She was not surprised. She knew the Cardassian mind well. She had grown up under their rule in a refugee camp after seeing her home, her family destroyed. She had known this would happen. Surrounding her, at their stations, O'Brien, Dax, Odo, and Bashir waited for direction. Mr. O'Brien, can you establish a high-energy Thoron field before they get into sensor range? I don't want them to be able to scan our defense systems. Aye, sir. Dax turned to Kira. They're hailing us. Kira turned her attention back to the site of the warships. The image before her flickered, became that of a Cardassian commander in his ready room. Balding, slightly plump, he studied his nails, then glanced at Kira with unmasked contempt. May I speak with the Starfleet commander? He's not available. The Cardassian's full upper lip curled slightly. "I'm not used to talking to Bajorn majors." "I'm all you've got." "I am Gul Jasad of the Cardassian Guard 7th Order. Where is our warship?" "With any luck, they're in the Gamma Quadrant, on the other side of the wormhole." Jasad rose half out of his chair, his face contorted with rage. "What wormhole? Our sensors show no indication of a wormhole in this sector." Kira played the game. "That's because it just collapsed." Dax spoke up from her station. "We believe it was artificially created." Brows knit in a scowl, Jasad shook his head. "You expect me to believe that someone created a wormhole, and now conveniently disassembled it?" Jasad's image disappeared abruptly, replaced by that of his warship. O'Brien called to Kira. "They're powering up their forward phasers." Kira looked at O'Brien. "Red alert. Shields up." O'Brien began working his panels. "What shields?" "I can transfer all available power to establish partial shields around critical areas, but if they hit the docking ring, we'll sustain heavy damage." Kira gave him a look that said, "Do it," and turned to Odo. "Constable, if you would coordinate moving all personnel to safer locations." Odo responded by moving swiftly toward the promenade. Kira turned to Dax. "Lieutenant, what was the last reported position of the Enterprise?" "At least 20 hours away." Kira knew it was impossible for the virtually unarmed station to last even 10 minutes against 3 Cardassian warships. But she had been up against impossible odds her entire life. "We've got to hold out until it gets here." Most times, she had no faith in the prophets. She had seen too many of her people killed for that, although she respected their religion. Yet she had believed in them all the nights she had had the dream about Sisko. And now she was moved to desperation. It was not right, it was not fair that the commander should try so hard to help, should risk his life on behalf of her people, only to fail, to die. And if the Kai had chosen Sisko as the messenger of the prophets, then why did they abandon him now? Help him. Help us. If you can hear me, if you can sense what is going on, if you exist at all, help. On the promenade, Odo spoke in a voice loud enough for the passing pedestrians to take notice. "Everyone is to evacuate this area and proceed to the Central Market area. Stay away from the buildings." Out of the crowd, the commander's son Jake appeared before him. The boy was near a state of panic. "Wait, my dad, I know he went out on the runabout. Is he back yet?" A glimmer of discomfort crossed the shapeshifter's face. "I don't have time for this." A memory surfaced unbidden in Jake's mind. Him, 3 years younger, and glancing up that last day aboard the Saratoga to see the wall burst into flames and come hurtling down toward him. He felt suddenly near tears. "Please, Constable, has my dad come back?" Odo hesitated, his expression unreadable. "No. The runabout has disappeared inside the wormhole." Jake was unable to comprehend, to make sense of anything except the clutching fear. "Please, move to the evacuation area." Odo hurried off before Jake could ask any more questions. Jake stood, numbed by the realization. Dad and the runabout were lost, which meant they might not ever be found. He glanced up at the tug on his sleeve. The Ferengi boy Nog was looking at him with an odd mixture of impatience and compassion. "Come on, Jake. We have to go." Inside his quarters aboard the dying Saratoga, Sisko coughed and fanned billowing smoke away in an effort to breathe, shrank from the unbearable heat on his exposed face, neck, hands. shrank from the unbearable sight of Jennifer and Jake crushed beneath the bulkhead. "I told you, I didn't want to be here. What's the point of bringing me back again to this?" Rannoch's pale blue face undulated in the heat waves thrown off by the fire. "You exist here. We do not bring you here." Behind him, Sisko saw Jennifer, 15 years younger and wearing the dress she had worn the day he had proposed in Zagi Park. "We do not bring you here. You bring us here." Rannoch gave a single, sympathetic nod. "You exist here." Sisko raised a trembling hand to his warm, sweat-beaded forehead. "Whatever it is we're trying to do here, let's get it over with. Enough." Opaka smiled at him through the veil of smoke and flame as she leaned forward on her cane. "Look for solutions from within, Commander." Sisko gazed on his past, aware of others watching beside him. Jake, Jennifer, Opaka, Rannoch. "I was ready to die." Rannoch looked at him, uncomprehending. "Die? What is this?" Sisko opened his mouth, prepared once again to explain, but it was Jennifer who answered. The termination of their linear existence. He glanced at her in amazement. She reached out toward him and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Then he looked deep into eyes that were at once familiar and alien, but filled with new understanding. His gaze swept the twisted wreckage of what had been his life aboard Saratoga. The flames leaping up through the ripped deck, the body of his wife pinned beneath the collapsed bulkhead. And the simple realization struck him so forcefully, so resoundingly, that he wondered at his own blindness. "I've never left this ship." The Jennifer beside him nodded, her warm hand still lightly on his shoulder. "You exist here." Sisko looked at the hellish scene surrounding him. I don't know if you can understand. I see Jennifer, trapped beneath the wreckage every time I close my eyes. In the darkness, in the blink of an eye, she's there." Jennifer's voice, the alien voice, came from behind him. "None of your past experiences help prepare you for this consequence." Sisko shook his head, slowly. "And I've never figured out how to live without her." The Jennifer alien moved beside him. "So you choose to live here? It is not linear." A wave of emotion swept over him, and at last broke. "No, it's not linear." Sisko knelt in the wreckage and wept amid the flames. The alien stood quietly as he grieved. There were no more questions left. No longer any need for words. The Jake alien graced him with a faint smile and a look of compassionate understanding. Sisko wiped the tears from his cheeks and returned the smile with gratitude. Lieutenant Dax looked up from her ops station. "Their lead ship is hailing us. Gul Jasad wants an answer." Kira acknowledged with a swift nod and turned toward the engineering station. The lives of Sisko and everyone on the station depended now on whether they were able to pull the deception off. "Are you ready, Mr. O'Brien?" "Yes, sir. When they penetrate our Thoron field, it should raise a few eyebrows over there." "Then let's give them our answer. Fire 6 photons across Jasad's bow." O'Brien released a faint noise of surprise. "We only have 6 photons, Major." Kira kept her gaze fastened on the screen. "We're not going to win this battle with torpedoes, Ensign." Kira watched with anxious exhilaration as a torpedo streaked through the starlit blackness and exploded in dazzling bursts just off the lead warship's starboard bow. O'Brien looked up. "An urgent hail from Jasad." On screen, Jasad was composed, although there was a clear note of incredulity in his tone. "This is your answer?" Kira's stance was defiant as she placed a palm firmly on the situation table beside her. "You don't think Starfleet took command of this space station without the ability to defend it, do you?" His full lips twisted into a sneer. "Your space station could not defend itself against one Cardassian warship." She drew herself to her full height and took a menacing step toward the screen. "You're probably right, Jasad. And if you were dealing with a Starfleet officer, they'd probably admit, we have a hopeless cause here. But I am just a Bajoran who's been fighting a hopeless cause against Cardassians all her life. So if you want a war, I'll give you one." She drew back, her chest heaving with honest rage. The Cardassian shook his head, speechless at her impudence. The screen darkened abruptly, and Jasad's image was replaced by that of stars and ships. Aboard the bridge of the Cardassian warship, Jasad stared at the space station on his view screen. He had no idea what to make of the Bajoran Major's threat. How could he be sure such threats were idle, now that Starfleet had command of the base? His first officer gave a slight bow from the shoulders and waited for Jasad to signal with a nod before beginning to speak. "They were using a Thoron field to block out sensors, Gull, but we were able to penetrate it." Jasad ran a finger across his lips to his chin. "What are their defenses?" "According to our scans, an estimated 5,000 photons, integrated phaser banks on all levels." Jasad frowned in amazement. When did they transport all these armaments? How did they install them without our knowledge? Oh, somehow, they've created a massive illusion of duranium shadows. His officer leaned toward him. "Why risk a confrontation, Gull? The Fourth Order can be here in a day." Jasad sighed in utter frustration. "And so can Starfleet." On Deep Space Nine, Bashir turned toward Dax as if to clasp her in joy. "They went for it! We've done it!" Frowning faintly at her console, Dax addressed Kira. "Major, the lead ship is sending out a subspace message asking for reinforcements." Kira stared at the screen. She had dealt too long with Cardassians to trust them. "Too soon for a victory celebration, Doctor. Mr. O'Brien." The ensign checked his readouts, recoiling slightly at what he saw. "The ships are being deployed into a standard attack formation, sir." Bashir fell silent. Kira exchanged grim glances with O'Brien and Dax. She felt sorry that they would have to die. Battle stations. The ops deck shuddered beneath the heels of Kira's boots. She shifted her weight, managing to keep her balance. Not a direct hit, thank the prophets. As the station rocked under the impact, O'Brien called to her. "They may just be testing us. I could run a pulse compression wave through the phaser banks, put out a blast that'll make them think twice." Kira clutched the console with one hand as the deck shook again. "Do it." She watched along with the others as the phaser blast streaked toward the Cardassian warship and made contact with the vessel. But the Cardassians' fire showed no sign of easing. Kira held on with both hands as the station rocked. "Damage report." "Direct hit. Level 14. Empty storage bays, no casualties." Her sense of relief was short-lived. Dax called to her. "Shields are down to 27%. Just then, Kira's world heaved to one side with a deafening roar, slamming her face down onto the deck. O'Brien reached for his console and pulled himself back to his feet. Dax called out over the chaos. "A fuel conduit has ruptured on the promenade." Major Kira addressed O'Brien. "Can you divert the main power flow?" His fingers began working his panel before she could get the words out, but the result made him grimace in frustration. "Controls are locked." A voice emanated from the comm grid. "Odo to Ops. I've got wounded people down here. Have you seen that doctor of yours anywhere?" Kira turned toward Bashir, but he was already moving for the turbo lift. For the first time, the Major was honestly glad to have the young doctor on the station. O'Brien wondered if it mattered that much. They were all dying now. It was just a matter of time before the Cardassians managed to rupture another fuel line, and another, until the station went up in a blaze that would light up the Bajoran sky like a small sun. The turbo lift had just descended out of sight when the station reeled again, and again. Dax called to the officers. "Shields at 18% and falling." Kira dragged her fingers across the console edge as if to dig them into the metal, staring at the warships with a bitter sense of failure and depthless rage at herself for trusting the prophets and her own foolish dreams. Her whole life had been one protracted struggle against this enemy, and now she had lost. Just as her people, her planet, would ultimately lose. O'Brien must have sensed her desperation. "I might still be able to give you one more round, Major." Kira pulled her hand away from the console and stood without support. "No. Signal the lead Cardassian ship that we will proceed with the..." Dax interrupted, her normally even tone filled with an excitement that made Kira turn her head to stare at her. "Major, I'm reading a neutrino disturbance. 15 kilometers off the forward docking ring. It's the wormhole." On screen, the wormhole exploded into view, shattering the darkness with a shimmering rainbow blaze of light, looking to Kira like the celestial temple. It was the most beautiful sight she had ever seen. In the mouth of the wormhole, the tiny runabout appeared, followed by a gigantic Cardassian warship some 50 times its size. Sisko's voice, loud and triumphant, came over the comm. "Sisko to DS9. Kira could not quite keep herself from grinning like a fool at the sight of Sisko on screen, perfectly unharmed and grinning like a bit of a fool himself. "Sorry to be so late. I didn't know we were having company. Clear me for docking, Mr. O'Brien." "Aye, sir. Cleared for pad C." Kira laughed as, for the first time, she realized the firing had stopped. When Sisko stepped through the airlock onto the promenade, he was feeling like a man reborn. For the first time in 3 years, he felt freed of his grief, freed of the past, able to look at the future. The clouds of guilt and self-pity had lifted, leaving him with clear vision. He knew what he wanted. He wanted to remain on DS9, wanted to continue to help the Bajorans. But turning down the position at Vesteris University was not a decision he could make alone. He would have to talk about it with Jake. The boy's feelings had to be considered. Sisko's attention drifted to the promenade. One of the shop fronts had been heavily damaged, and he could see where one of the buried fuel lines had erupted, scorching the deck. Odo and Bashir were crouched over a wounded Bajoran and talking in such a decidedly amicable fashion that Sisko did a mild double-take. Jake ran out of the crowd and threw himself into his father's arms. Sisko hugged the boy with a surge of love so fierce, he blinked back tears. "Dad, I was so scared you wouldn't come back." Sisko patted his son's back as he would an infant's. "It's okay. I'm home." "Hey, you smell like smoke. You okay?" "Yeah, there was a fire, but it got put out. You should have seen it, Dad. It was real scary for a while. The Cardassians were firing on us, and the whole promenade was shaking, and even after Odo said the runabout had disappeared in the wormhole, I knew you'd come back." Jake stopped and blinked as though the thought had finally occurred to him. "Are you okay, Dad? What happened out there?" "I've never been better. I'll tell you all about it when we get back to our quarters." He slipped an arm around the boy's shoulders, and together they walked over to Odo and Bashir. The Bajoran woman they were tending smiled in faint recognition up at him. Sisko asked about casualties. Bashir looked up at him. 13 injured, Commander. None seriously." Sisko nodded and moved with Jake toward a turbolift. "There's something I need to talk to you about tonight. A decision I need you to help me make. I got a job offer earlier today as a professor at a university." "A university? You mean you'd be a teacher?" Jake wrinkled his nose at the thought. "Well, is that really what you want to do, Dad? Doesn't sound very exciting." "It's at Visteris University, Jake. On Earth." He braced himself for an excited outburst, for Jake to fling himself into his father's arms again, but instead, the boy frowned. "I thought you'd be happy, Jake." "Well, I guess I'm happy if you're happy. I just don't care anymore, Dad. I want you to do what you want to do. And I'd have to leave Nog. I mean, I hardly had any time to get to know him." A slow smile spread over Sisko's face. He patted the boy's shoulder gently. "I think we can manage to give you that time, Jake." Before he could say more, the lift came to a stop at Ops. As the two of them stepped out, Dax called to him. "The Cardassians are waiting to speak to you, Benjamin." The images of Gul Jasad and Dukat appeared before him on the view screen. Sisko graced them with a tight little smile. "Welcome back, Gul Dukat." Dukat revealed a white sliver of teeth. "Commander, I'm pleased that we were able to escort you safely home." Sisko exchanged a faintly amused look with Kira. "Gentlemen, I've made contact with the life forms that created this wormhole." Jasad straightened and gave a threatening look. "Then I must state our position, that this phenomenon is clearly in territory that has been controlled by the Cardassian Empire for 6 decades, and as such..." Sisko cut him off. "I've made an agreement with these beings on behalf of the planet Bajor that allows for safe passage through the wormhole. Those who violate that agreement will find themselves lost between here and the Gamma Quadrant. If you care to challenge what I am saying, I suggest you fly back into the wormhole and see for yourselves." A long silence passed as the Cardassians scowled at him, and then Dukat addressed him with no small amount of bitterness. "Just who are these beings?" Sisko opened his mouth to begin a long explanation, then stopped and smiled faintly as a simpler, truer answer occurred to him. "The prophets of the Celestial Temple." He turned to find Kira gazing at him with unmasked wonder. The following day, the Enterprise returned, and Jean-Luc Picard requested permission to board the space station and hear firsthand from Sisko what had happened. When Sisko glanced up from his monitor in his office and saw Picard lingering in the doorway, he rose and extended his hand. This time, Sisko smelled no smoke, heard no wailing, saw no red flash of a sensor scope, no monstrous hybrid of metal and skin. This time, he saw only a man, a very human man built of flesh and blood, who had been deeply scarred by the Borg. Sisko forgot his own pain and considered Picard's, and felt ashamed of his earlier behavior. He clasped Picard's hand firmly and was relieved when the pressure was returned. Picard narrowed his eyes slightly, curious at this sudden warmth. Sisko wanted to say, "Forgive me," but the words died in his throat. Instead, he smiled in apology. Picard caught the smile and returned it. Sisko released Picard's hand and motioned for the captain to sit. Picard spoke first. "So, Commander, Apparently your transfer to DS9 has already borne fruit. I'm most curious to hear how you would manage to locate the wormhole. Sisko grinned and told him, explaining everything. Picard listened with great interest, nodding with approval at Sisko's praise for his officers, and at his optimistic outlook on the effect the wormhole would have on the Bajoran economy. It seems you've put Bajor on the map, Commander. This should become a leading center of commerce and scientific exploration. And for Starfleet, one of our most important ports. Sisko hesitated, and then looked at Picard. Captain, regarding our conversation about someone to replace me, Picard's expression grew opaque, unreadable. I'm sorry, I haven't had the time to communicate it to command. Sisko relaxed in relief. I would prefer you ignore it, sir. I'm not sure I can, Commander. Are you certain this is what you want? Because we can't afford to have someone in command here who... I'm certain, sir. Picard regarded him in silence for some time, and then he stood and stretched his open hand across the commander's desk. Good luck, Sisko. Good luck to you, sir. And Sisko had no doubt that the captain understood perfectly well what was meant. Sisko transported planetside alone, save for a very special burden, carefully hidden from sight in its receptacle. This time, as he walked down Bajor's streets, his attention was drawn not to the destroyed buildings, but to the signs of rebuilding, of new life. Shopkeepers had set up an open-air market in the square near the temple, and the air was filled with the voices of haggling merchants and buyers. In the distance, the Aubergine Mountains stood, serene and breathtakingly beautiful. Sisko came to the entrance of the great stone temple and paused before stepping from the bright sunlight into the cool shadows. A young monk appeared almost immediately and bowed from the shoulders. Commander, welcome. Sisko smiled, returned the bow. The monk turned and strode briskly through the great, echoing chamber. Sisko followed. The exterior walls had been patched, and monks now worked on restoring the interior ones. Opaka stepped forward out of the darkness. Her smile was as radiant as Sisko's own. Commander Sisko, I see you have brought us yet another gift. Sisko laughed aloud. No, Opaka, just returning one you gave me. He followed her to the reflecting pool holograph, and together they went downstairs into the secret chamber. Opaka gently took the ark from him and placed it on the shelf. Sisko smiled faintly. 14 planets have already contacted us about opening trade routes through Bajoran space. Opaka nodded as she turned to him. The prophets have been generous. He moved toward her, eager to tell of the amazing, timeless beings within the wormhole. I have a lot to tell you about your prophets, Opaka. She silenced him with a wave. Does it surprise you that I do not wish to hear? He drew back, disappointed at not being able to share all that he had learned. But then he considered her point of view and gave her a small, understanding smile. She returned it with relief. Perhaps that is why a disbeliever was destined to seek them. One should never look into the eyes of her own gods. Sisko nodded and sighed at the memory. It was quite a journey. She took a step toward him and reached for his jaw with gentle fingers, tracing her way up to his ear. This time, he relaxed and did not recoil from her touch, and felt no pain. Interesting, Commander. This is only the beginning of your journey.
Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Emissary, was performed by Nana Visitor. The novelization was by J.M. Dillard, based on the teleplay by Michael Piller. Story by Rick Berman and Michael Piller. It was abridged for audio by George Truitt and directed by Bob Walter. Post-production by Stephen Erickson. Original music was composed by Carl Sharif, Sam McCallie, Eve Beglarian, Richard Emmett, and Carl Schurtz. Theme music from the Star Trek television series was composed by Alexander Courage and Gene Roddenberry and used courtesy of Bruin Music. The associate producers were Linda Woolman and Jan Werner. Deep Space Nine, Emissary, was produced by Karen Frillman.